On today's episode of the CLS Experience, we have a very enlightened treat. She's an iconic author, activist, spiritual leader, and a force to be reckoned with in the realms of political activism, just to name a few. She has authored several influential books, including The World Shaking, A Return to Love, The Law of Divine Compensation, and Healing the Soul of America, all of which offer wisdom, compassion, and help the readers tap into their inner potential, which I absolutely love. Her compassionate endeavors led to the foundation of Project Angel Food, a nonprofit organization that has delivered more than 16 million meals to ill and dying homebound patients since 1989. And as a nonprofit activist, she's championed numerous causes, from encouraging diverse and progressive Democrats to run for office to lecturing on spirituality and politically progressive topics to audiences worldwide. She's now taken the political stage, running for the Democratic Party for President of the United States with a progressive platform that promises a brighter future for all. She's just a juggernaut in all facets of life and a terrific mother and human. Please welcome the trailblazing, dynamic, compassionate, the ever-inspiring, the multifaceted Marianne Williamson. How you doing, Marianne?
Well, that introduction was so generous and kind. I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You feeling nice and elevated? I did good by you?
I tell you, you totally succeeded at lifting me up. Thank you.
Mission accomplished. But as I always like to say to a lot of our mutual friends and guests, so forth, it's your story. You wrote it. I just said it with a little bit of pizzazz.
You said it with kindness and generosity.
Oh.
And there's too little of that in our world today. We've become a mean-spirited society almost. I think social media has fostered that. A lot has fostered that. So when you come across people who are just kind of kind and let you have the space and say, be great, show us what you got, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. There's so many places to take this conversation. For our listeners now, we're about 6 million. My best suggestion is to play catch up, do a deep dive. In case you weren't familiar, check out all the amazing stuff Marianne has going on, all her books, all the stuff she's doing now. What I think is most valuable today is we just have an unbelievable conversation. Before we dive in, we're going to get a little weird. You ready for me?
I'm ready for you.
Marianne, when you wake up every day, for you personally, what are some non-negotiables?
What is non-negotiable is that I remind myself that no matter what is happening today, you, Marianne, are not a victim. So let's be really honest about how you feel. Be really honest about what's going on for you. But at the same time, remember that you yourself are responsible for grounding yourself in a space where you have the greatest possibility of rising above whatever you need to rise above and to expand your good and the good of others. And whether that has to do with prayer, whether it has to do with reflection, meditation, whatever it is, I realize that if I do not do that kind of inner work, that I'm setting myself up for a day that will not be all that it could be. And that's to say the least.
Yeah, I love that. It's so beautiful. And I was watching some of your content, which I highly suggest everybody do immediately following this conversation. And when you were describing prayer, you described it. I thought it was so beautiful. You said something along the lines of it's a connection with God or ability to communicate. But obviously, you said it a lot more better articulated, so to speak. But how would you describe what prayer actually is?
Well, the spirituality is a path of the heart. And the idea of a spiritual path is that there is a realm of consciousness, of reality, of ultimate truth, whatever you want to call it, that is beyond the world as we know it. And that the world as we know it is kind of a matrix, as it were. And we're all in trance living within it. And it keeps us stuck to thoughts of limitation. It keeps us stuck to circumstances and thoughts and feelings which do not bring joy. And the spiritual path, the religious path, whatever you want to call it, is the idea that all of that is kind of like a veil in front of a truer truth. And prayer is a way we reconnect to that idea of something more real than what we might be seeing at the time. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're having a fight with someone that you love. You know you love them. They know you love them. You know they love you. And they know that you know that they love you. But this conversation has just taken you to a place where you can't get past the walls that your personalities, your egos have built between you. Just in a moment, knowing. That's what the phrase "be still and know." Just knowing. You know, sometimes when we go through something like that, we say, "This can't be happening. This can't be real." That comes from the place inside you which knows that on some level it's not, that there's a realm behind the personality. Behind the personality is the fact that we love each other. And to me, prayer is a bridge. It's a reconnection with the world in that moment unseen, but which we have faith exists. And by simply knowing that, beyond this moment, let's take Israel and Palestine. These are two peoples who have gotten along very, very well for centuries. There's that poem by Rumi that most of us have heard. Beyond all ideas of good and bad, right and wrong, there is a field, I'll meet you there. Prayer means I know that field exists. And by my acknowledging that exists, I am opening my mind. I am willing myself. And then, of course, you find, and that's why that poem is so powerful. The only way you can get there is giving up your ideas of good and bad, right or wrong. So, prayer is ultimately a prayer for the healing of our own minds, that we might be able to give up the thoughts that keep those walls in place that separate us from each other and from our deeper selves.
Yeah, I think that's the most beautiful thing I ever heard. This is the only negative I've got going on is we don't have 20 hours to chat, but I know it's just beginning the friendship. Make a long story short, just to give you a little context, I reinvented myself in the pandemic. Prior to that, I've been on Wall Street for 13 years and I was making a lot of money. And as it turns out, success is not just making money. There's a lot more to it. And I found myself in a pretty dark place. But during that 15-year stretch, I've been obsessed with personal development. I loved your work and a bunch of other people as well. I just didn't think I was worthy of turning that into a career. And then in the pandemic, when I reassessed and I realized I had a choice, I went all in on what we're doing now. And for the first time in my life, I've really been in alignment. We've had a lot of success over the last few years and very humbled by that. But it's so interesting how the universe works and so forth. One of the books that I recently gravitated towards is A Course in Miracles. And, you know, I know that plays a huge role in your life as well. And one thing that I'm also doing now is, you know, I do a lot of coaching, so it's nice to be a student. So I'm taking a Kabbalah course here in New York City. Two things that I know you're very familiar with. I wanted to give our listeners just a little context before we dive into political stuff and so forth, because A Course in Miracles played a huge role for you. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were in your 20s in New York City, you came across the book, and you're Jewish like me, but you were so read the cover didn't really have an author. So you dove into that book, and what happened next?
Well, when I first saw the book, I was intrigued. I think sometimes now you see books that don't have authors written, you know, on the cover. But in those days, I'd never seen such a thing. So I thought that was so weird. And I opened the book, and in the introduction, it says, "This is A Course in Miracles. It is a required course." Now, once you read the book, you realize that doesn't mean this particular book is required. What's required is that we're all on a spiritual path, whether we know it or not. We're all on a path of learning, whether we know it or not. And so I put the book down. I saw the language, heavily Christian language, or so I thought. Once you read it, you realize, no, it's Christ-centered language, but it's not within the construct of a particular religion. It's a metaphysical Christ.
Yep.
So I didn't pick it up for another year. And when I picked it up a year later, it was really interesting because that party I went to where I saw the book on somebody's coffee table, I attended the party with my boyfriend, my then boyfriend, and we were living together. And I don't remember that we really discussed it much. I mean, I probably showed, I said, "Oh, look at this book." He looked at it. I don't know. We didn't talk about it. But the man whose party we were at did say, "You know, if you want that book, it's sold at an apartment. The publisher is in an apartment at the Beresford apartment building, which is there on Central Park West. And what is it, 79th or 72nd? 79th, I think.
I'm not sure.
Right across from Natural History Museum."
Okay.
Anyway,
Yep.
so Jeff and I didn't talk about it, but I saw it various times during that year. I'd be on the bus, and I noticed a couple times people, even that I'd known in my past, one who was the ex-boyfriend of a girl who'd been my roommate, and I saw him reading it. Just these weird little things. And then a year after that party, I was on my way to a doctor's appointment because every year in the winter, I would get bronchitis. And I was so depressed about it. And I just said to myself, as that bus passed the Beresford apartment building, I made a mental note. You know what? I'm going to get that book. I'd had it with my life not work with at that time I was thinking in terms of my bronchitis. I'm going to get that book. And I went to the doctor and I took the same bus home, Upper West Side, New York. And I walked into my apartment and on the dining room table, there was the Course in Miracles. And I looked up at Jeff and like, what? I just looked up at him and he said, I thought it was time. We hadn't even discussed it for a year.
Wow.
So he had seen it in a bookstore. So mine is one of, I mean, I don't know how you came across it. Today it's been more popularized. In those days, there weren't all these, popularizations of it.
True.
But a lot of people had interesting stories. Somebody would say something like, I was in the waiting room, my mother was having an operation, it was on the table. Somebody else would say, it sat next to my bed for years before I picked it up. Everybody has their story. And I also think the Course in Miracles, I've never met anyone for whom the Course in Miracles was like a beginner's metaphysics. It's something you've read, something, studied something, been through something that makes you more open to. Yeah.
It's definitely not the easiest read.
Well, when I wrote A Return to Love, I've always said it's like the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
It's like hopefully making it easier for some people to sort of dive in because it's not an easy read. But I think even the fact that it's not an easy, first of all, if it's for you, you know it. Because, you were saying before that there was a time when you were obsessed with personal growth. If it's time for you and this book is for you, you can't get enough of it.
That's true. True, which is why our audience can't get enough of you. This is so much fun. I wanted to ask you a couple more nuggets and then we'll dive into political stuff. I saw you say this and I just thought it was so special. You said the real life of sacrifice is the life we normally live, where we sacrifice the awareness of who we really are and why we're really here. I wanted to ask you from your vantage point, who are we really and why are we really here?
Love. Love is who we are, and love is why we're here. It's both the noun and the verb. And living in this world, we are taught to forget that because this world is dominated by a thought system based on the idea of separation and fear. That is the sacrifice. That is the life of sacrifice. We've sacrificed our joy. I have a granddaughter now. She's 5.5 months old. And when you're around, yeah, thank you. When you're around an infant, when you're around a little baby who hasn't yet experienced anything but love, her mommy and daddy are just in love with her. She is just her grandparent. Everybody's feeling like she hasn't experienced anything else yet. And to watch how undefended her body is, and when she lies in somebody's arms, you can tell in that little brain, she hasn't had anything to inform her yet that the world could be dangerous.
Pure.
And you see what life could be. That really is heaven. The awareness of oneness, the glee. So the world of sacrifice is that we've sacrificed our sense of meaning, we've sacrificed our sense of self. And so the Course in Miracles talks about how surrender to God isn't sacrifice. So sacrifice is the life you lived before. You sacrifice this sense of your separate identity and just live to love.
Yeah. Beautifully said. It's so fascinating to me, based upon your body of work and all this and what you're doing now with the politics and so forth. I think that if you love politics or it's not your thing, one thing that nobody can deny is it could be a bit of a polarizing and nasty landscape. How do you navigate that with your spirituality and so forth?
Well, I think that no matter who we are, whether we think that we like politics or not, any thinking person today knows that something has gone wrong. I know a lot of people who have kept politics at arm's length, but they're not stupid. and they realize, wait, something's gone wrong. Too many of us don't have health care. Too many people are loaded with college loan debt. Too many carcinogens in our food. The climate crisis is already here. Too much violence on our streets. Why are we fighting these wars? So this idea of keeping ourselves at arm's length from the space of conversation and activity through which policies are determined, I think a lot of people are sort of in process right now. They don't want to go back to the old politics because it is corrupted. It's about power. It's about money. It's toxic. And let me tell you something. You don't know the half of it.
I believe it.
Okay. However, what would happen if you had a broken leg and you went to the doctor and your bones literally sticking out, right? What would happen if the doctor said, "Ew, ugh, ugh, that looks awful. Let's just talk about your arm." You have to address the wound. And when it comes to spirituality and personal growth and transformational thinking, every area we've touched, we have helped transform. Medicine, healing, science, education, even business, relationships. And the only reason that a higher kind of personal growth and transformational thinking has not transformed politics is because we haven't gone there yet. And in politics, it is at least as relevant. I'll give you an example. They see everything, let's say the economy. They view everything through the filter of data. I view that's the transactional model, and just treat the symptom and don't even look at the root causes. The transformational model is, oh, I don't see everything through the filter of data. I look through the filter of despair. How many people's lives are falling apart? And so in a transformational politics, you don't just address the symptom, you address the root causes. And one of the reasons that the old transactional political types don't want to address root causes is because of how much that system and how often that system is the root cause. Nothing's going to change there unless we get in there and change it and develop a new conversation. That's what we did around health and healing. We developed a new conversation. And that's what we need to do with politics. And we need to do it quickly because the old way is not only inadequate to solving the problems of the 21st century, it's actually perpetuating a very dangerous trajectory, both domestically and internationally.
Yeah, it really is a crazy landscape. And even me, I never really talk about politics on here and so forth. But if you look at like the last campaign, based on my opinion, like a lot of people didn't like Trump. And as a result, they were kind of voting against him as opposed to for Biden per se. But we need a breath of fresh air. Like you, someone to come in with some new, fresh ideas.
Yeah,
where
something to vote for.
Yes.
Not just if all we can offer for those who don't wish to see Trump return to the White House, if all we can offer is show up at the polls to vote against Trump, go to the polls because you are afraid. That mentality will only put Trump back in the White House because of all the people who just stay home. To say I'm not even going to bother to vote. And my agenda is exactly what you said. Here is something to vote for. An agenda which will actually create the way for a season of repair, a better life for people, a real turnaround, a real new beginning. That's what my campaign stands for. And that's what I think it's not even just that it wins in relation to Trump, it wins the future for our democracy. We've got we should be thinking about a lot more than just the next 4 years. We should be thinking about the next 20 years, the next 100 years. So we need to get about the business of a new conversation and a new set of options. I think it was Werner Erhard who said, you can live your life out of circumstances, or you can live your life out of a vision. So if you're stuck in the old transactional 20th century model of politics, we're just dealing with circumstances. And if all you do is look at circumstances, people are getting depressed. If all you do is look at the circumstances, people's lives are just spiraling down. Some people's lives are literally spiraling down in terms of limited opportunity, economics, and so forth. Other people were just spiraling down psychologically, emotionally, because you look at the circumstances and you go, we're done. That's why we have to bring to bear the personal growth, transformational, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, thinking. No, let's envision. Let's envision our democracy strengthened, not diminished. Let's envision our children happy and safe and educated and loved. Let's envision our planet repaired, the earth repaired. Let's envision healthy food. Let's envision peace on earth. Let's envision what we want. We've been taught, we've been trained to limit our political imaginations. And I think that that's what the personal growth world is. That's the major contribution. Open your mind to possibility here. Open your mind to possibility. We've been in tough times before in this country. There was slavery, there was the institutional suppression of women, there was the Gilded Age, there was segregation. Somebody came along and imagined it could be different. And that's what we need to do now. Let's imagine a new beginning. Let's imagine course correction. Let's imagine repair. Let's begin from there. And through that power, which I believe is the power in us, but not of us, anything is possible.
When you speak, I get this feeling of bringing people together as opposed to what politics has done specifically recently, which is divide people.
Well, everybody has to get out of their silo right now. I mean, everybody's stuck in their own individual. I'm Black, I'm brown, I'm white, I'm Jewish, I'm Muslim, I'm Christian, I'm gay, I'm straight, I'm non-binary, I'm Republican, I'm Democrat, I'm left, I'm right, I'm libertarian. People are just, that's a fractured sense of self right there. So if I only stay within the fractured identity of that aspect of who I am, then the country is of course fractured. It's a, we're supposed to be the United States, out of many, one. That yes, we're all different. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but that we have common fealty to a particular set of principles, and those principles are about liberty for all and justice for all, and that everybody have a fair shot. They're not left or right. So that just goes back to what I was saying. A lot of the change that's necessary is in our own hearts to prepare for this moment and to be able to really rise up to the challenge of what this moment means.
I just had like a breakthrough as you were talking, because I know
Tell me.
I know we're dealing with a lot of chronic economic anxiety, but really in regards to mental health, just as a collective in general, it's never been, worse, you could argue. And I know the pandemic, the lockdown had a lot to do with that too, but I also imagine a lot of it has to do with the people that are supposed to be in charge and guiding us are in disarray. So how is that supposed to make people feel underneath that? Maybe they lose a little bit of hope and faith, which causes anxiety.
Well, first of all,
That's pretty deep, I know. It's okay.
sorry about that.
No problem.
First of all, you point to something that I think is very relevant and that few two people will acknowledge. And that is the role that economic anxiety plays in what we call the mental health crisis. When you have 70% of Americans who are living with what they call chronic economic anxiety, 62% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Over a third of the people in this country saying that they regularly skip meals in order to pay their rent. The level of anxiety is extraordinary. So what is the system as we know it doing about that? Well, it's throwing enough crumbs to people to be able to alleviate the suffering. But that system is so bought and sold by this matrix of corporate power that it won't challenge the bottom line of that matrix, which is their own short-term profits. That's why we don't have universal health care, because of the institutionalized greed of the insurance companies. And when you think about it, 1 in 4 Americans are living with medical debt. Debt is crippling. So 1 in 4 Americans live with this debt. Why? Just so that the insurance companies can make more money. We have 1.3 million Americans rationing their insulin. think what anxiety that is. Will I be able to afford my insulin this month? Given that I need it to live. And what am I going to do if I have to choose between my insulin and my rent? That's a little bit of anxiety there.
Yes.
When you go to the grocery store and you don't even know whether there are carcinogens in your food that you're feeding your children. All this is the stress. It's like I said before, some people look at economic data. I look at all that human despair. And that's why you can't leave economics and politics out of any meaningful formula for the healing of the world. I've said for a long time that the people who are involved in personal growth, the people who are involved in spirituality and transformation, are the last people who should be sitting out these great social, political, and economic issues, because if you know what changes one life, you're the one who has an idea what would change the world. So somebody says, well, I don't want to look at economics and be part of that conversation because it's toxic. No, take what you know and look at why it's toxic. It's toxic because it's like sociopathic. You know, a sociopath is someone who has no conscience. A sociopath is someone who feels no regret and no remorse about just messing with people. That's the way our economy operates. A relatively small portion of Americans, you have 1% of Americans who now control 50% of the wealth. And the bottom half of Americans controlling a little over 2% of the wealth. So you've got a tiny group of people, got it going on, and the majority of Americans living with this constant economic, it's mental pain, stress, and anxiety. That's not going to change unless we change it. And also, in terms of spirituality and personal growth, there's no spiritual or religious path anywhere that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. And people who live day after day, week after week, working really hard, but really just white knuckling, please, I hope I have enough to pay the rent this month. I hope I have enough. And what will we do if little Johnny gets sick? And what do I say to little Ashley, who wants so much to take ballet classes, but we can't afford it? Day after day, month after month. And you think that's going to make you in a state where you can be emotionally available to your partner, to your children, to love, to sex, to citizen activism? No, people's lives are falling apart.
And you mentioned the word despair there, and despair should be the exception rather than the rule in someone's life.
And I saw that change happen in this culture. I'm old enough to remember when it just wasn't so hard. You know, in the 1970s, the average American worker could afford a house and could afford a car and could afford a yearly vacation and could afford to send their kids to college. That's called a thriving middle class. We don't have it anymore. And we had it in the 1970s.
Crazy. When you first started in this transformational space, or whether you're one of the pioneers, I think it was like you, Deepak, maybe a couple others, and you're still doing your thing, but obviously you shifted your focus a bit. How do you feel with all the progress that's been made since it's become a little bit more mainstream?
I see progress. I see the mainstreaming of the ideas, and that's great. That part's great. I also see a lot of prostitution of the pure source material.
I know what you mean.
A lot of people have discovered the sort of capitalist opportunity of calling yourself a spiritual leader after you've attended a couple of seminars.
Yeah.
So it's a little, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Marianne, what is the difference between magic and miracles?
Well, in the Course in Miracles, the way the difference is described is that magic is when it's almost like you're using God as your errand boy. I can use metaphysical principle to focus on what I want and make it happen. Well, you might be able to do that. Miracles is something very different. Miracles is where you ask that your life be used for purposes of love. You're not trying to get anything, you're trying to give everything. And the line in the Bible, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, all else will be added unto you, means seek first to just eradicate any barriers that divide you from other people. To seek within yourself any thoughts of judgment, any thoughts of blame, any thoughts of unforgiveness. Find that pure field of love, not that it's easy. And in that space, miracles occur naturally. You're not trying to get anything because your life's enough. You are owning the vast enoughness of your capacity to love unconditionally, and then everything you need to have happen is going to happen.
This is so good. I mentioned Kabbalah before, and your face kind of lit up. I imagine you've done some work with that.
With that idea?
Just Kabbalah in general, like you've
Oh,
studied.
Kabbalah, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, I'm Jewish, so the Kabbalah has always had a lot of meaning for me. You know, the Kabbalah is the mystical core of Judaism, just as Sufism is the mystical core of Islam. All the great religions, there's Gnostic Christian tradition as well. All the great religious systems have the mystical teachings at their core. And the Kabbalah, of course, is the mystical teaching of Judaism. And I also believe there's one truth spoken in many different ways. So when you read something like the Course in Miracles and the Kabbalah, let's say, you're never going to find opposition there. That's one of the ways that you know that you're reading something that's true. It's because it resonates with the truth you've read everywhere else. So if you're reading the mystical core of the Kabbalah and of Buddhism and of Islam and of Judaism, and then you go, oh, yes, right. There's one truth with a capital T. And it's spoken in many different ways, and they can all be celebrated.
Yeah, so good, and it's true. There's a lot of similarities between all that stuff. Maybe spoken.
There's one truth.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask you one final nugget. I know you wrote a whole book about it, the principle of divine compensation. I just think that's such a beautiful concept for our listeners that might not be familiar. What exactly is that?
It's the idea that the universe is both self-organizing and self-correcting. So as long as our hearts are aligned with love, then it's like a harmony that is built into things. You're more likely to attract positive relationships. You're more likely to be in a space that people will like you and want to work with you. You build good relationships. Just when there's love there, you're more likely to have a life that works. Okay, but we're human beings and we're all wounded by something, past or present. And so we all sometimes get off, right? We swerve. But the universe is like a GPS. If you take a wrong turn, then the GPS automatically recalibrates your path.
True.
So the law of divine compensation is the universe will divinely compensate for lack and for error. That's what the atonement is. The idea that you can correct in your mind any lovelessness that came into the system. And that applies to money as well as to everything else. Many years ago when my career first began, this would have been back in the 1980s, okay? I rented a theater and I had done some singing. And I had some people who came to my lectures who were musicians. And I said, let's do this great night of music and Course in Miracles. It'll be really cool. And brilliant genius promo mind here, right? Instead of saying at my lectures, which were well attended, you guys have got to come. It's going to be amazing. I see this in myself now. I don't know how to promote. I mean, I see this in my political thing. It's difficult. But instead, I just told people, come, there's a big surprise, assuming everybody would come. Instead, not many people came. It was an amazing event, but not many people came. And almost everyone who came said, "Oh my God, this is amazing. If I'd known it was going to be like this, I would have brought 10 people." Right? And I was devastated, among other reasons, because I had lost $10,000. Now, first of all, $10,000 is $10,000 anytime, but it was in the early 80s. And I was not in a place, I mean, it was devastating. It would be like 50,000 would feel to me today.
Yeah.
So my parents had flown in. And my father came backstage and he said, "I'm so proud of you, little sister. This was great." And I looked at my father and I burst into tears. And I said, "Oh, Daddy, Daddy, it was terrible." He said, "What are you talking about, little sister?" As he used to call me little sister. I said, "Daddy, I lost $10,000. And he looked at me and he said, "No, you listen to me, young lady. If anybody says anything to you about the fact that you lost $10,000, this is what you say to them: I can absorb the loss." He said, "Let me tell you something. We come from Texas. Let me tell you what a millionaire is in Texas. It's somebody who's made $1 million and lost it. And then they made another $1 million and they lost it. And then they made another $1 million and that time it sticks. That's what it takes. So if anybody says to you, 'How can you lose $10,000?' You just say, 'I can absorb the loss.'" And that's exactly what I did. That there was this one girl, Terry, and she was part of the evening and she was a good friend. "Oh my God, you lost $10,000." I said, "Terry, I can absorb the loss." And my mind just stayed there. And that's exactly what the law of divine compensation is. If you stay in, oh my God, ain't it awful?" And you believe in the lack, then you'll stay within the lack. But you affirm that the universe is infinitely abundant and you will absorb the loss. And that's in time, over time, what happened. And not only that, but I got the lesson from it.
That's
So
unbelievable.
to me, the law of divine compensation is that the universe will always correct your errors if you are willing to atone, make amends, and be different next time.
And it's all out there. We just have to be able to download it, right?
And absolutely. And I think that that applies. And that, going back to my running for president, that applies to the country as much as it applies to our personal lives. But in order to correct your life, you have to be willing to look in the mirror. And the country needs to look in the mirror. Where are our policies, both domestically and internationally? Where do they and where do they not align with who we say we are? And it's the same process, all that a nation is a group of people. So the same psychological and spiritual principles that apply in the journey of one person apply in the journey of a nation. That's why I think we need a president who understands that.
Yeah. And I'm looking at her.
Thank you.
Yeah. Final thing. I know it's not really a short answer, but I'd love to hear your take on it. How would you describe God?
Love. Simple answer. God is love. There's a line in the course. This course does not aim to teach the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. But it does aim to remove, remove from your awareness all barriers you hold against its coming. I think God is all that is real and ultimate, and that is love, and that is who we are. And it's like we were saying, it's why we're here. And when we forget that, things go wrong. And when we remember that, things go right.
Right. Wrapping up with a little rapid fire, 1-word answers, 2 seconds. You ready for me?
Mm-hmm.
Favorite movie?
The Mission. 2 words.
The Mission?
You said my favorite movie?
Yeah.
The Mission.
I got to check that out. Okay. Your last meal on earth would be?
Salmon and salad.
Mm.
Oh, my last on earth. I thought you meant my last one I've had. Oh, my last one. You must have thought that was weird. I don't know. I thought you were saying your last meal.
Keeping it healthy all the way to the end.
Salmon last night for dinner. Sorry. My last meal. I don't know. Depends on how I die, I guess.
Okay, fair enough. Favorite guilty pleasure?
What gives me pleasure?
Your favorite guilty pleasure?
Oh, my favorite guilty pleasure. Oh, getting with my daughter on Instagram and watching all those little baby videos.
I love it. Favorite book, not including yours?
Course in Miracles.
And last but not least, this is a big one. Your favorite musician?
Wow.
This is deep.
I guess I'd have to say Bob Dylan.
Good one. For our audience, we're about 6 million now. They're very loyal, engaging. I know what you're up to now. What's the best way for all of them to support you?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, if people want to go to Marianne2024.com, Marianne, we have an extraordinary opportunity here to break through a kind of trance. I think when it comes to our personal relationships, we're all used to having pretty blunt, serious conversations about things that matter in our lives. But when it comes to politics, we've all been trained to sort of think like sixth graders, to limit our political imaginations, to just say, oh, I'm not into politics, or to just parrot platitudes that we got from somewhere. And that's an inadequate response to the times in which we live, because we're all aware something's got to change. But we can change it with love, we can change it with wisdom, we can change it with carefulness and responsibility. And no, it doesn't have to be someone who's been part of that system. To say that we should only trust people whose careers have been ensconced in the car that drove us into this ditch to possibly be considered qualified to drive us out of this ditch, I think is silly. The issue is not that we don't have enough political car mechanics. We have plenty of them. The problem is we're on the wrong road. And we're not a government of the people, by the people, for the people right now. We're a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. We need someone who's not part of that system, who's had enough experience, thank you, but a different kind of experience, enough experience to know that's got to go, enough experience to call it, to name it, to go in there for 4 years, give this kind of chiropractic adjustment to this country. The government needs its heart back. And when it comes to politics, we the people need our spine back. We owe it to our ancestors and we owe it to our children. We're right now like a ship headed for the iceberg. In 4 years, which is all I want to serve anyway, I'm not saying I can turn the ship around entirely, but I could get us around the curve. I believe that. By naming some things that need to be named, calling for some changes, and using the executive power of the presidency to make those changes, whether it has to do with universal health care, tuition-free college and tech school, living wage, those things which are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy and should be considered moderate positions in ours. So if you think that that conversation belongs in the mix, and I definitely do. As a matter of fact, I think it's the only bulwark to fascism at this point. I hope that you'll go to Marianne2024.com. I hope you'll drop in a few bucks. I hope that you'll sign up to volunteer and be part of really a deep, radical humanitarianist movement that wants to turn this country around in a far more loving direction.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with any of that. And one thing that nobody can deny is we need some big changes.
We need some big changes, and that's really the point. Not these little incremental shifts, these little incremental tweaks. We're headed down, and all we're doing is heading down at a different direction, or in a managed way, or at a slower rate. We've got to intervene. We've got to interrupt the pattern. We've got to get into the solution and start over again. That's what other generations have done, and that's what we need to do now too.
Love it. This was awesome. Hang up for 1 second. I want to connect with you after. I want you to know the definition of authenticity, compassion, and deep wisdom. I could personally guarantee your best is yet to come. Keep on spreading your wings and leaving your mark on this world. So much love and respect for you. Thank you so much for stopping by and dropping these priceless, juicy nuggets today. That was awesome. I mean, I could talk to you all day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, that was great. I've always loved your work, but I'm so excited for what you're doing now. And genuinely, I just want to say thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So appreciate it. You have a beautiful day.